Welcome to Northlandia, a place to bring your curiosity because here you'll find curiosities. I'm White Buckner of the Duluth News Tribune, and I will be your guide as we discover the unique and fascinating stories here in the Northland. Here we celebrate the region's distinctive people, places, and history. In this episode, we head north to visit an old school keeping Finnish immigrant history alive. Let's venture forth into Northlandia. To take us inside this former school, I'm joined again by News Tribune reporter Teri Cadeau. Teri, welcome back.
Thank you for having me back. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so Teri, first off, talk to me about how did you go about finding the story?
So this is a place that I've known about for quite a while because I used to cover Lake County a lot. I was a reporter for the Lake County News Chronicle back in the day. And I went to Toimi School once before for a Lake County board meeting. It was the middle of summer. As it is an old Finnish two-room schoolhouse, there is no air conditioning there. It was a very interesting meeting, but I was very glad to be there because I'd passed by it before when traveling between the range and Two Harbors and Silver Bay, but I'd never stopped. I stopped in and maybe used a restroom there, but I'd never gone into the building, so that was really neat to go there. So when we were looking for story ideas for Northlandia and I saw it as a potential idea, I was like, yep, I want to go back there and learn more about this place.
Mm-hmm. And really quick, what is Toimi School?
So it is an old two-room schoolhouse, because a lot of time you hear the phrase a one-room schoolhouse. Well, this one actually had two rooms. Started as a one-room, but they discovered they needed more room to teach their students. And it was for the Toimi community, which was a small, mostly Finnish immigrant community out. It's about 30 miles north of Two Harbors. It's in between Silver Bay and Hoyt Lakes along a forest highway out there. And it was a really big community back in the day, in the early 1900s. But it ended up closing down in 1942 and was used as, of all things, a garage for the county for several years before it was given back to the community to become a place of historic preservation. So.
Mm-hmm. And to give us a little more background on the school's history, we spoke with Ron Johnson there at the school, and he's a member of the school community board, correct?
Yeah, so he's on the Toimi School board. That is not like the school board for the area. They're the historic preservation, the board who runs it as a community center. And he is someone he did not go to the school. He was too old to have gone there because it closed in 1942. But his mother went there along with a lot of his aunts and uncles back in the day. So he heard stories while growing up about this school.
This area was open to homesteading in the late 1890s, and the people that moved in here were Finnish immigrants. And when people lived in Finland, the country of Finland made sure that everybody was literate in Finland. So when the Finnish people moved here, they realized the importance of education. So they started having schoolhouses and various homes in the area. And then as the community grew, the homes were just too small. So they built this addition over here first. And not to get sidetracked, but there used to be a wall here separating the lower grades from the upper grades. And when you look at the front of the school, that's why we have two entrances. And all these doors here were like cloak hall doors or library doors. So each of the two classes would have their own library. So the kids went to the one side of the school was basically kids from 1 to 4th grade, and then this side was like 5th grade to 8th grade. And after 8th grade, if they wanted to continue their education, they went into Two Harbors and boarded in various homes.
And let's just talk briefly about our experience visiting up there. I've never even heard of Toimi School prior to setting up this story. And you kind of set the scene of where it's kind of located. It really, at least in my perception, was kind of the middle of nowhere. There was seemingly nothing much really around except for a lot of bugs. When you got out of the car, I got swarmed by mosquitoes, gnats. I'm not really sure. They were buzzing around. You could actually, in my video, you could actually hear the little buzzing around. There was that many.
I have to be honest with you. Ron Johnson did warn me a little bit about the bugs, so I was dressed in appropriate clothing, but it doesn't prepare you for the amount that can be out there when you're walking, especially when you're out walking on the grass and such. When you're on the path, it's not quite as bad, but yeah, it was definitely a buggy day. And it is definitely a place that when you're traveling that very quiet road, it draws your eye as you're passing by. You see this big white two-person building that has a rest stop in it, and you just kind of wonder what was this? What could have been built here? Why is this still a place? And it's definitely an intriguing place in that way.
Oh yeah, I would have considered it a very peaceful location. Besides if it wasn't for the bugs, it's because there's such greenery around, and like you could hear the birds chirping, and it felt very peaceful. And then there was bugs just flying right in my eyeballs as I'm trying to like film and get footage, kind of disrupt the piece of it. But it's a really interesting looking building, kind of in the middle of nowhere.
Well, and it's very close also to the dividing line between like Lake and St. Louis County. It's very kind of on that near the border, so it's kind of an interesting area just in that sense. It's very out there and quiet, right before you get into like Bassett Township and such like that up on the range. And yeah, it's an interesting spot.
Yeah, so you touched
a lot of Finnish names. Sorry,
no, you're good.
You drive around and you're just like Salo Road or such like that.
Mm-hmm. So you touched on this a little bit, but like how over the years has the space been utilized, and how is it utilized now?
So for years, it started out, as I said, as a school. So they started out teaching mostly kids under 6th grade and below, so kindergarten through 6th grade. And anyone who wanted further schooling had to go into Two Harbors to continue their education. It was a school where once you entered into the school, you had to speak in English. So even though maybe your first language growing up at home was Finnish, once you get to school, you're taught how to speak English, and you have to do it whenever you're there.
Like a complete immersion experience.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting because we have a lot of like immersion schools now where it's kind of the opposite, but yeah. And then, so it started out as that. It was used as a school for many, many years. And then by 1942, the community had kind of dwindled a bit, so they found they didn't need anywhere. They started busing the students into Two Harbors for all of the years of school they were going to go to.
They ran the school until 1942 because during World War II, when most people went off to war, they realized there was more to the world than Toimi. So they closed, in 1942, they closed the school and they bused everybody into Two Harbors for school.
Then kind of went to disuse. It wasn't used for much of anything for several years. Then I believe the Forest Service used it first as a storage space, and then the county took it over as a garage. And so they would put graders and such in there when they weren't using it. So like one entire wall was taken out for the garage doors. But the good news, as Ron Johnson says, the good news is that they're using it, kept the building in somewhat decent shape. They kept a roof on it. They kept a good roof, and so they were able to use it again once they got it back from the county. And they got it back from the county in the early 1990s and started using it more as a community center. And they put up a lot of historic displays. They gathered a lot of items from people who had gone to the school or had just items that were similar to what would have been used in the school. You'll hear that a lot when you talk to Johnson. He's like, and this is something that would have been used. And it's like, okay, it's not necessarily from that school, but it gives you an idea of what it was like. You walk around and you see the desks and you can get a feel of what it would have been like to go to this type of school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think listening back to the interview, it sounded like it was just like the floor was the main thing that had to be fixed and worked on. And everything else seemed to be in pretty good condition because of that county ownership.
Yeah, that definitely helped a lot. But yeah, they had to put in a completely new floor, which I believe he said they got from a school gymnasium that was closing down. So it came from a different school gymnasium and they put it in there.
What happened to the garage door? Because obviously the garage door isn't there anymore. But
right.
there was a photo there that you could see that has...
You can see the outline of where it was. And they got a bunch of siding that matched the original interior siding. So they were able to cover it. I don't know what happened to the door itself. I'm guessing, I don't know what happened with that. But they rebuilt a wall there and they made it look like how it did. And there used to also be a wall, when you walk in there used to be a wall that divided the two sections of the schoolhouse. In fact, there are two entrances. When you look at the outside, you can see that there are the two entrances into the schoolhouse for different grade level. I believe K through 3rd ended up in one door, and then 4th through 6th went through the other door.
Yeah, and because of that divide there, they also had like two sets of libraries, if I understand correctly, or like two.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, they kind of had to have two of everything essentially.
The teachers' quarters, there was only, I believe, one teacher's quarters though. At that time, then teachers would live at the school, and so they had a little separate entrance and everything for their teachers' quarters, and they had a kitchen they could make meals and whatever. Yeah, it was a interesting place to take a tour of for sure.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because there's that history of that space there, but it's obviously changed a lot because there's not that dividing wall anymore. No. There's obviously not that garage door anymore. It's hard to even picture there even being like, I think they said it stored like a grater in there.
Yeah.
Like, it's just hard to imagine that being kept in that space.
Yeah. When you look around, you're like, well, this screams school. This doesn't scream former garage. And that's pretty neat. I'm glad that it was able to be preserved in that way, especially the little rooms in the front that they didn't have to rebuild, or, it's just been pretty well kept. And that's due to volunteers. That's due to people wanting to keep this place and have it be a monument of what school was like back in the early 1900s. So it's pretty neat.
Yeah, and talk to me about what all is there right now. Like, we touched on how there's some memorabilia there, but let's kind of walk through the space like we kind of did. Like, what all was there? Well,
there's a lot of photos, for sure. A lot of photos of old classes that went through there. There's a big set of desks set up in a classroom formation, and then a bunch of chairs set up because they do have community events there. Like, for example, that county board meeting that I went to back in the day. And then they have a giant furnace that they would have used to heat the school back in the day, as well as they rebuilt. Okay, so they didn't have a pump house there anymore, so they rebuilt the little white pump house that's right next to it, and they filled it with photos of what the area looked like, as well as there's also a set of restrooms outside the back that have I'm not going to pronounce the words, but in Finnish, boy and girl labeling the restrooms, which are open to the public for use throughout the summer.
Yeah, and there was also like a couple sets of what he described as cups that were like assigned to each student that they would use for drinking water. Those are still like on the board there on the wall. Yeah,
that was something that Ron talked about, remembering his mother talk about back in the day about these cups. So every child had their own cup, and so the teacher would go to the pump house, pump some water, and they'd have a little dispenser, and every child had their own cup.
And there also was in the corner there a mannequin of what I presume was a teacher.
A model of what a teacher would have dressed like, I believe, is what the idea of that is.
Mm-hmm. This would make this the second Northlandia story I've done where there's been a mannequin. The 3M Birthplace Museum also had a mannequin. This one didn't scare me.
So Lake County likes mannequins.
Yeah. This one you could see a mile away. The one that was in the 3M Birthplace Museum, literally if the lights were off, you walk the corner and it's just like, oh my God, there's a person sitting there. This one didn't have quite that effect. You could
it was definitely a mannequin. Like it didn't give me a creepy vibe at all. It was very much like, oh, okay, that's what a teacher would. Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm. Do you know if the desks that are there were part of the school originally?
A couple of them are originals, but a lot of them are just ones that are similar in style. I believe that's what Ron had told me, is that a couple were originals, but a lot of them were taken by just over the years when it was not being used. People he kind of intimated that people may have like broken in and gotten desks out over years. He's not saying anything, but also he's pretty sure people just kind of took them. And like I said, some of them are original, so some people brought them back. But yeah, and it's kind of interesting to go and look at those old style desks because they were built different than how our desks are today. And yeah, and you look at the wood and you see but you still see the same things as you do in like a desk at a public school today. You see the carving of like TL plus RK,
Yeah, I think Ron tried to demonstrate sitting in the chairs.
Yeah, he did.
He made a comment how they weren't exactly the most comfortable of seating.
No, they're very wooden and they're very straight and they're very, And
if I remember correctly looking at it, it was like they're built into each other a little bit, or like your desk is kind of connected to the person's seat in front of you, and it's all...
It's not exactly built for social distancing, no.
Oh, definitely not. Definitely not.
No, so it's tight quarters, but you got to remember also we're not the main focus. Adults are not meant to sit in these. No. These are meant for children. These are meant for very young children. So perfect size for them. Maybe not so much for us.
Mm-hmm. And besides the memorabilia that's there right now, how else is the space utilized today? Like, I understand that it has a rest stop component to it now. They also host events there. Yep. Like, talk to me a little more about that.
So they have it's very much a community center now where they host a lot of events. Some of them centered around the historical aspect of the space, but also just community events. So there's a chance to gather as a community. I believe they have a midsummer event coming up sometime in June here, and so they do a lot of community-focused things, which is exactly what the schoolhouse probably would have done. Well, I think he mentioned there was a different building that hosted more like this. I believe there was like a dance hall across the street. Sorry, that's off track. But basically, it serves the function of being a meeting place. It's a place for the community to come together, and also a place to go where you can learn more about your history. You can look over the records of who went to school there and see the classes, photos, and such like that, and see where maybe your relatives came from, or at least a similar setup to what would have been if you came from a different area.
And you mentioned earlier that you first went there for a Lake County board meeting. Do they still have county board meetings there?
Yeah, he said once a summer, usually. They tend to have one there. I will warn you, it is usually during one of the hotter months of the summer, which is good because like the building, I imagine, gets pretty cold in the winter because they don't really do much to heat it. But they do then open up all the windows and it does get a little warm, a little buggy. But it was a interesting county board meeting for sure.
And why do you think the school still has relevance today? Like, why is it relevant enough to kind of keep it preserved the way they have been, to kind of keep it operating in the community?
I think a big thing about it is that although it was built and used over 100 years ago, or like 110 years ago is when it was built, right? Yet, Bron Johnson is like the first generation after to not to have gone to school there. So, I mean, we're literally only one generation removed from the students who would have gone there. Well, we're a couple more generations. You know, what I mean is there's still a generation around was the first generation after, you know. So it's long ago, but it's really also not that long ago in the grand scheme of things. So it's a look back to a time that seems so very different and yet again isn't that far away. So I think it's a good connection for people to a time that maybe they didn't grow up in, but they want to learn more about. It's a good place to know, to get some context for where we are today, why the education system is set up the way it is today, where it came from, where it started, why we made changes or didn't. So it's kind of a good connection to the past in that way. And like I said, it's a labor of love for the people out there who keep it going, who keep it preserved, who keep doing the fundraisers and opening their doors up every summer and giving tours. They wouldn't do it if they didn't feel like it was important. It's not run by, anyone who's getting paid. It's run by people who are spending their time there on a weekend just because they think it's important.
My mother went to school here, and all of my aunts and uncles. I think it's worth preserving. We all love history. We all love finding out about something, our heritage and stuff. And I think that's one of the factors of why we're doing this. And also it's a sense of community that this Toimi area had. The Finnish people, survived off the co-op movement when all these small towns were in existence. And I think we all inherited that community spirit.
All right, Teri, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much again for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining us on this venture into Northlandia. To read the article for this week's column, as well as see photos and video produced by myself, visit duluthnewstribune.com/topics/Northlandia. You can find all the episodes of Northlandia on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you or someone you know has a unique story that you believe can have a place here in Northlandia, let us know by emailing northlandia@duluthnew's.com. Join us again next week and discover the extraordinary stories that you just might miss if you're not in the right place at the right time, ready to step off the beaten path with no rush to return, here in Northlandia.